He went to sleep a scholar and woke up cross-examined. In a night vision he would never forget, Jerome found himself before the seated Christ. "Who are you?" "I am a Christian," he answered. The reply struck like a gavel. "Liar! You are a Ciceronian, not a Christian." The words burned because they were true. He loved Latin the way sailors love wind, the surge of Cicero's periods, the polish of Rome, the applause of style. But the verdict exposed a fracture he kept stepping over. He had trained his tongue, yet starved his soul. If Scripture is God speaking, why was his heart still annotating the forums more than the prophets? He woke with the taste of judgment on his tongue, and, strangely, a path. Not to despise learning, but to convert it. Not to abandon eloquence, but to place it under obedience. He would take the talent that once chased applause and make it kneel at the edge of revelation. Jerome was already baptized, already devout, already the kind of man who slipped into catacombs to pray at the tombs of martyrs. But that night turned belief into direction. He could not unknow the charge. He could not unhear the choice inside it, style or truth. He chose the truth even if it scraped his pride raw. So he began to fast from the pages he loved. He let the classics cool on the shelf. He learned to sit with a different kind of difficulty, silence, heat, his own impatience. He promised himself a harder excellence, to handle the word like a craftsman and not a showman, to measure every sentence against the weight of God. This is the pivot most of us dodge. We polish our gifts and hope the polishing itself counts as holiness. Jerome refused that shortcut. He wanted the truth to rule his craft, not the other way around. He would rather be corrected now than applauded and empty later. Was he intense? Volcanic. He would still be witty, still be sharp, sometimes too sharp. But after that verdict, the edge on his pen pointed somewhere different. Not toward a crowd, but toward a text. Not toward victory in debate, but toward fidelity in meaning. Hold this scene because it explains everything that follows. The deserts, the languages, the letters that crackle, the friendships that fund a scriptorium, the Bible that becomes an anchor. A scholar did not become smaller, he became honest. And honesty changed his appetite. If God had spoken, then the first duty of genius was to listen. The desert doesn't flatter, it strips. Jerome walked into Syria with books he refused to open and appetites he refused to feed. Heat pressed him flat, silence pressed him inward. If the classics had trained his tongue, the wilderness now trained his ears. He found a teacher, a Jew who knew the letters that built Genesis. No polished lecture, no marble hall, just rough benches and rougher consonants. Hebrew didn't glide, it gripped. Verbs bucked tense and time. Names carried places inside them like seeds. Jerome stumbled, then stood, then started to hear cadence where he once heard noise. He learned to love roots. Not the leafy quotation, the root that feeds it. He chased a word back through prophets and psalms until the soil gave up its scent. When a verse resisted, he resisted longer. He copied lines at night by lamplight, the ink drying as slowly as his pride. Hebraica veritas. He wrote the truth of the Hebrew. Start there. Everything else is a version. To some friends, the change looked like loss. Why trade the gold of Latin for a rougher or... Jerome heard a cleaner question. Do you want the sound you love, or the truth God spoke? He wasn't abandoning beauty. He was refusing counterfeit. Mastering Greek had cost sweat. Mastering Hebrew cost self. He learned to wait on sentences. He learned the holy art of not improving what God said. Where the text was spare, he stayed spare. Where the text was jagged, he let it cut. He discovered something the forums never taught him. Obedience can be eloquent. There were days he missed the old applause. So he set new measures. A good day was not praise. It was a preposition placed exactly where Scripture put it. A victory was not a debate one. It was a metaphor kept intact across languages. He trained his taste to prefer accuracy to elegance, and found a different elegance waiting for him on the other side. The desert did more than teach grammar. Taught gravity. If a syllable could tilt theology, then every syllable deserved fear and love. He began to carry small scrolls like other men carry knives. Ready, precise, and never casual. So when a summons came from Rome, a bishop traveling west, a church drowning in competing Latin copies, Jerome didn't hesitate. He packed the alphabets he had bled for, and the hunger that taught him to listen. He wasn't going to win arguments. He was going to mend a voice. Rome had a problem only a librarian could love. One church, 1,000 manuscripts, and no single Latin Bible that read the same from Spain to Syria. A verse in Gaul leaned one way, the copy in Jerusalem leaned another. Local translators had done their best, brave, gifted, inconsistent. The result was a Vetus Latina tapestry with threads from everywhere and a pattern from nowhere. Enter Pope Damasus. He wanted a voice the whole church could recognize in one hearing. He calls Jerome to Rome, not to decorate texts, but to diagnose them. Jerome studies the patient, marginal notes that crawled into the line, glosses that hardened into scripture, corrections that weren't corrections at all, just opinions with ink. This wouldn't be editing. This would be surgery. He starts with the Gospels. He lays multiple Latin copies side by side, pulls in the Greek, weighs readings like a judge weighs testimony. Where scribes harmonized out the rough edges, he lets the evangelists keep their distinct voices. Where a familiar line is actually a tired mistake, he risks the outrage and sets it right. He keeps the Latin clean, but refuses to make it polite where the Greek is fierce. Truth before habit. Not everyone applauds. People marry their Bibles. Change the wording and you feel like you've changed the God who spoke it. Jerome knows the ache. Sense before sentiment. He also knows what drift does to doctrine. He writes prefaces, explains choices, and keeps cutting anyway. The goal isn't novelty. It's unity without flattening, accuracy without chill. His method is relentless and simple. Compare, confirm, correct, trace a word back to its source. Guard metaphors from pious improvement. Protect hard sayings from soft hands. If a copy is slipped, the slip ends here. If a local reading sang, Rome watches the work change shape. A scriptorium forms around his desk. Runners ferry leaves. Secretaries take dictation. Jerome argues with himself out loud, weighing rhythms, testing clauses, refusing to bully the text into Latin manners. He wants a Bible you can pray and parse. A Latin that bends to revelation instead of bending revelation to Latin. And slowly a voice emerges. Not Jerome's voice, not Damasus's, not a provincial accent thick from one corner of the empire. The gospel in Latin that sounds like itself wherever it's read. The city begins to hear the difference in churches, in courts, in markets where catechists teach. What was patchwork is becoming a garment. He could have stopped with the Gospels. He doesn't. The same discipline will reach Acts, the Epistles, the Psalms, and then, most controversially, the Old Testament driven by Hebraica Veritas. Each step draws fire. Each page draws the church a little tighter together. That's the Rome chapter, a pope who asked for clarity, a scholar who chose courage, and a city where words finally agreed with themselves. The patchwork is closing. But the deepest test is ahead, when Jerome reaches past Latin comfort and grabs the Hebrew root with both hands. Jerome made a decision that felt like heresy to comfort. If the prophets wrote in Hebrew, then the church deserved the Hebrew, not guesses about it. He didn't scorn the Greek, he honored it. But he wanted the river, not the canal. That stance lit fires. People loved the readings they had grown up with. Change a single noun and you changed the room. Jonah's plant? Gourd here, ivy there. A psalm line? Softened by habit in one copy, sharp as flint in another. Jerome would trace each word back to where it first breathed. If the root said this, he refused to print that. He called it Hebraica Veritas, the truth of the Hebrew. It wasn't a slogan, it was a rule of love. Find the earliest voice and tell it straight, even if the straight line cuts. So he sat with rabbis, compared scrolls, weighed idioms that Latin could barely carry. Where Latin wanted smooth, Hebrew stayed muscular. Where Latin wanted flourish, Hebrew wanted torque. He chose torque. Critics accused him of Judaizing. He answered with patience and fire. The Church isn't less Catholic for listening to the language God first used, he argued. It's more. He wasn't unbuilding tradition. He was unlatching windows so the original light could come in. The work changed his prose. He tempered elegance with exactness. He learned when to let a rough edge show, and when to tuck it just enough that Latin wouldn't lie. He wrote prefaces like trail markers, what manuscripts he weighed, why this reading stood, where another fell. Scholars could argue, but they could not say he hid the trail. And when he reached books the Hebrew canon didn't shelve the same way, he didn't slam doors. He noted the difference, kept the Church's use in view, and worked so prayer and text could still meet without confusion. Unity didn't mean flattening. It meant telling the truth about sources and the truth about worship at the same time. What did all that war over words buy? A Bible that could survive empires. Pages a monk could chant, a bishop could preach, a student could parse, and a widow could memorize. Not a museum piece. A living tongue with its roots showing. Jerome's method is still a mirror. When we're tempted to soften the line so no one frowns, he stands in the doorway and clears his throat. Start at the source. Carry it carefully. Do not improve God. Rome had asked for one voice. Hebrew gave that voice bones. Now the work would leave the capital, cross the sea of his critics, and find a cave where sentences could harden into an anchor. Jerome wasn't built for half measures. He wrote like a man putting out fires with a sword. When bad ideas stalked the Church, he didn't whisper corrections into the wind. He sent letters that landed like hammers. Helvidius said Mary's virginity was only temporary. Jerome answered with texts, grammar, and heat. He walked verse by verse, naming assumptions, sealing seams. Was the tone sharp? Often. But the point was surgical. Protect the mystery where Scripture protects it. Jovinian shrugged at fasting and celibacy, flattening the difference between chosen renunciation and ordinary life. Jerome pushed back hard, not to despise marriage, but to defend the witness of those who laid down legitimate goods for a greater flame. Holiness isn't a scoreboard, it is a sign. He wanted the sign visible from Rome to the far edge of the empire. Then came Rufinus, once a friend, later a foil. The quarrel over origin and translations dragged loyalty into the street. Jerome fought in public, sometimes too publicly. He drew lines, revised positions, and admitted where a phrase went too far. It's messy to watch, but it's the mess of a man who thought truth deserved precision, even at the cost of pride. Read him closely and you'll see the craft behind the thunder. He doesn't throw adjectives to win, he stacks evidence. A genealogy here, a preposition there, a manuscript habit exposed like a loose thread. He quotes, he parses, he presses. The burn you feel is friction, truth grinding against error until the sparks die. Were there casualties? Egons, yes. Even friends flinched at his speed and edge. Jerome knew it. Some letters carry apology as well as argument. He could acknowledge the temper that rode shotgun with his zeal, and still refuse to park the car where confusion reigned. His letters became a school. Not just answers, methods. How to weigh a claim. How to listen to Scripture before slogans. How to treat a controversy like an operating room. Cut what must be cut, spare what must be spared, and keep the patient alive. Copyists spread those letters like seed. Monks read them aloud. Students underlined margins. Bishops borrowed the scaffolding for sermons. Don't miss the paradox. The man famous for heat built a refuge for clarity. If you sat under his sentences, the temperature might rise, but the outline snapped into focus. You learned where the text ended and opinion began. You learned that charity without backbone becomes sentiment, and backbone without charity becomes noise. Jerome kept both unevenly, imperfectly, humanly. He could wound and then bind. He could argue and then kneel. But he would not let the church drift because someone might frown. He would rather face tomorrow's regret than today's silence. What does that demand from us? To love people and propositions. To correct without contempt, but to correct. To remember that a sloppy sentence can become a sloppy creed, and sloppy creeds become broken lives. Jerome's pen was fierce so that hearts could rest. The controversies didn't define him, they revealed him. A steward who believed ideas are neighbors we must protect, not rumors we can ignore. And when the city cooled and the noise thinned, he turned back to the desk, back to the text, back to the work that outlasts every quarrel. When Rome cooled, Bethlehem opened. After Damasus died, and the city's intrigues nipped at his heels, Jerome crossed the sea and chose a cave near the Nativity. He traded marble halls for limestone, noise for lamp smoke, applause for pages. He didn't come alone for long. From Rome, Paula and Eustochium followed, women of means and mind who built what Jerome could only imagine. A monastery for women, a house for men, a guest house for pilgrims, and the beating heart of it all, a scriptorium. They found parchment. They hired hands. They paid copyists, fed travelers, and turned a cave into a campus. By day, the rooms hummed, quills scratching, dictation rising, scraps of Greek and Hebrew trading places on the table. By night, the lamplight pooled over columns of ink, Old Testament, Gospels, letters, Psalms. Jerome's desk became a crossroads where manuscripts met and parted better than they arrived. When a reading faltered, he sent runners for other copies. When a gloss crept into the line, he pushed it back to the margin. When a nuance refused Latin entirely, he found a way to carry it without dropping it. His mail never stopped. Bishops sent problems, monks sent puzzles, students sent flattery mixed with real questions. Jerome answered with commentaries that feel like field notes, quick sketches where others wrote frescoes. He marks where the Septuagint leans one way, the Hebrew another. He tells you which copyist likely blinked. He lets you see the scaffolding, not just the facade. Around him, prayer kept time. The women prayed the hours, educated girls, memorized psalms, and managed the money so parchment didn't run out. Jerome sparred on the page. Paula and Eustochium kept the lights on. Without their logistics, there is no Jerome, the world quotes. Legends wandered in, as legends do. A lion limped into the cloister, monks bolted, Jerome plucked a thorn, the lion stayed. So the story says, painters loved it. Truth or not, the image reads like a footnote to his method. Approach what others fear, look close, remove what infects, then live at peace. Another image took root, a skull on the desk, a bone-deep reminder that deadlines are literal. Memento mori wasn't a mood, it was a schedule. Get the text right because you won't get forever. Pilgrims came for the holy places, stayed for the holy work. They watched sentences move from scroll to leaf, watched letters tilt until they matched the sources, watched a vision become a discipline. Some donated money, some donated labor, some just watched and left changed. The labor outlasted the quarrels. In this cave, Jerome's Bible found weight. Not a patchwork, a spine. Not one man's opinion, a sustained act of obedience to the text, funded and formed by a community that believed the world needed a single voice it could trust. When age crept in, he didn't retire his pen. He wrote letters that warned, encouraged, corrected, and occasionally repented. He taught younger scholars to love manuscripts more than applause, and truth more than victory. He grew simpler in aim, sterner in method, and on good days, gentler in speech. Stand in that cave for a minute. Ink, dust, prayer. A woman's ledger checking costs. A boy warming parchment by a brazier. Jerome leaning close to a stubborn verse until it yields its shape. That is how anchors are forged, slowly, correctly, and together. The pages will leave Bethlehem. They'll cross languages and centuries. Councils will speak of them. Teachers will lean on them. Ordinary people will whisper them at graves. The pages left the cave and kept their promise. Scribes carried them. Teachers leaned on them. Parishes prayed them into muscle memory. Across centuries, the Latin Bible Jerome forged began to sound like the Church's own heartbeat. Then history lurched. Empires changed flags. Printing presses hissed to life. Manuscripts that once wandered now multiplied overnight. With abundance came chaos, marginal notes as text, local habits hardened into how it must be. The Church did the grown-up thing. She named a reference. Councils spoke with the cool voice of duty. The Vulgate, this disciplined Latin line, would be the authentic standard for preaching, teaching, and public judgment. Not because other versions were useless, but because ships need an anchor. An anchor doesn't freeze the sea. It gives you fixed truth when currents pull. Editors followed with editions that behaved. Corrections made openly. Prefaces that told you what moved and why. A stable text meant a stable pulpit. Bishops quoting the same words in cities that barely shared a language. Meanwhile, vernacular translations flourished. People prayed in French, in English, in Polish, not as rebels to the Latin, but as children who needed the word at mouth level. The anchor didn't stop the boats. It kept them from drifting into reefs. Jerome's clarity cut through the centuries like a keel. He had insisted on sources. The Church insisted on a standard. Together they built something rare, unity without uniformity. You could sing the Psalms in a tongue your grandmother knew, and still know that the line came from a backbone strong enough to carry doctrine. Was everything simple? Never. Scholars still argued, carefully now, about readings and rhythms. Printers still made mistakes. Pastors still needed footnotes. But when storms rose, the Church could throw a line to a text that had already survived worse weather. Listen to the philosophy beneath the policy. The Church is a people formed by a word, not a club gathered around a favorite book. But because that word lives in sentences, those sentences need guarding. Jerome's Vulgate became less a trophy and more a guardrail, reminding translators what fidelity feels like, reminding preachers how precision sounds. So if you pick up a pocket gospel today, or hear a reading in a language your heart thinks in, you're still tied to that cave in Bethlehem. You are hearing a voice that learned to speak with one mouth across time. You are hearing the gift of a single anchor in a restless sea. Jerome didn't live to see all of this. He died spent, in the year 420, with ink on his hands and penance in his bones. But the line he threw into the deep still holds. It holds scholars to honesty, pastors to clarity, and the rest of us to hope. Which leaves the final question not about councils or copies, but about you. What will you put under obedience tomorrow? Your schedule, your talent, your attention. Jerome chose the truth over the applause of style. The last section is where that choice lands on your desk. Jerome's story won't stay in the 4th century. It keeps walking to your desk, to your phone, to your late-night brain where excuses sound like wisdom. It asks one clean question. What will you place under obedience? You don't need a cave. You need a practice. One page of scripture before the screen. One psalm while the coffee brews. One gospel paragraph read slowly enough that a single verb can rearrange your morning. Copy a line. Put it in your pocket. Let it argue with your habits until your habits blink. Jerome learned to let the text set the tempo. You can too. Where the word is spare, resist filling the silence with noise. Where the word is sharp, don't sand it dull for comfort. Where the word sends you to reconcile, stop composing replies and go. Where the word sends you to rest, stop worshiping your to-do list and sleep. But what about your talent? Your cleverness, your training, your name in small lights? Jerome's verdict cuts clean here too. Convert the gift, don't cancel it. Keep the skill, put it on a leash. Let scripture set the route and the pace. And suddenly talent stops dragging you into crowds and starts pulling you toward fidelity. Make yourself some rules that bite a little. No phone before a page of the Word. No posting before prayer. No hot take on a verse you haven't looked up twice. When a sentence confuses you, assume the sentence is right and your hurry is wrong. Look up the cross-reference. Read the footnote. Ask a wiser friend. Obedience is not smaller than freedom. It is how freedom stops drifting. Expect resistance. Your vanity will quote Cicero back at you. Your calendar will swear there isn't time. Answer like Jerome answered the desert. One page, one verb, one act of staying with the text until the text stays with you. You are not trying to finish the Bible this week. You are trying to let the Bible finish you over years. And when you fail, because you will fail like a craftsman, not a quitter, return to the bench. Sharpen the tools. Apologize where your tone outran your charity. Keep the zeal. Soften the edge. Never dilute the truth. Jerome's temper left scars. His fidelity left an anchor. Choose the legacy you want to hand to people who will never know your name. There is a quiet courage in accuracy. In a world that rewards speed, you will become someone who rewards sense. In a feed that crowns novelty, you will become someone who honors source. In a moment that treats words like fog, you will become someone who treats words like wood, weighty, measurable, capable of holding up a life. So here is your rule of life, stolen from a scholar who finally learned how to pray. Start at the source. Tell the truth of the text. Do not improve God. If the old accusation ever visits, you love style more than truth, don't panic. Smile at the diagnosis. Then change the treatment plan. Close the tab. Open the page. Read slowly. Obey quickly. And let the word do what it did to Jerome. Turn brilliance into service, and service into a life that outlives its noise. Saint Jerome, fierce friend of the word, teach us to study without pride, to speak without spin, and to place our best gifts under the weight of Scripture. Then make us brave enough to live what we read.